through to Ms Lauder.
Madam Speaker, I thank Ms Shane for bringing this motion today. Unfortunately, unlike Ms Shane, I'm not convinced the government is delivering on that core commitment to deliver great basic local services or even adequate services for our city. It was interesting and a little disappointing to note that much of Ms Shane's motion seems to come directly from a cut and paste of Ms Fitzharris' media release of the 23rd of May, which was headed More Essential Services for Canberra's Growing Suburbs. Seems as though it's a case of if you keep telling yourself that something's great, you must believe that it's true. But if you move away from here on London Circuit and indeed from Ainslie Place, you might see that things are actually quite different. What is the case is that the appearance, the amenity and the safety of our city was something that once all Canberrans were very proud of and visitors to our city remarked upon. It was once a city that whether you lived north of the lake or south of the lake, whether you lived in what was Nappy Valley, at various times that could have been Woden or Tuggeranong and potentially Gungahlin, whether you're in the inner city or the outer suburbs, everyone was proud of their local parks, their playgrounds, their shops, their bike paths, libraries, parks and lakes. I'm very proud of Canberra. I'm proud to live here and I made a decision to live here after living in all other states and territories of Australia and overseas. But in the 30 years that I've been here, I've seen that gradual deterioration of the general suburban amenity, and so do people who visit here from interstate. It was a city where you used to know that the barbecues would work when you went down to your local park and to a lake, where the toilets were always open and always clean, where the trees were pruned, where the footpaths and verges and parks were mown, where the street lights worked and where dogs were kept under control. When things needed repair, they were fixed quickly and without fuss. Playgrounds were maintained and upgraded when necessary. Graffiti was removed. Street lights were on all the time at night and streets were swept and repaired. But we don't have that attractive appearance any longer, the rich amenity and urban safety that Canberrans were once so proud of. Over the years, Madam Speaker, you can see from analysing and looking at the annual reports, this government has gradually starved our local services of resources, despite huge increases in our rates and despite population growth and more suburbs and more ratepayers. This has resulted in a litany of broken footpaths, gaping potholes, unmown parklands, broken streetlights and more roaming dogs. Many Canberrans feel less safe. Dog attacks are still not being investigated appropriately, even though there was the terrible case of a Canberra woman killed by a dog last year. More attacks are being reported all the time and going under investigated. You just have to see some of the social media pages of various suburban groups around Canberra to see people reporting that their dogs have been attacked and in some cases killed by other dogs. In some cases where there are other dogs coming onto their own property and killing their dog. This comes down to staffing pressures at domestic animal services as well as weak, dangerous dog laws. We're just not backing up the staff who work in that area appropriately. We've found now in this budget that the long-promised staff increases do not appear to be there. Last year, the Minister was on, I think, the ABC radio, talking about doubling the frontline staffing at domestic animal services. This appears to be a bit of a cruel hoax on that hard-working frontline staff. This budget actually announced 2 additional animal ranges. It's also a deceit of the public, who increasingly do not report roaming and dangerous and menacing dogs anymore because they know that nothing will be done because of a lack of support and resources in that area. On a different matter, over 8 years, the number of kilometres of street sweeping has decreased. It has declined in real terms up to 2016. Conveniently, then the government stopped reporting the kilometres swept in annual reports. So whilst we have additional kilometres of streets because of more and more suburbs, in real terms, the street sweeping has declined. This is not only a visual amenity and a safety issue. I hear from elderly people especially, and in some particular suburbs, about leaf litter making it dangerous for pedestrians, but it results in dangerous roads and clogged drains. And of course that adds to the organic load in our lakes, leads to more public risks as our lakes are then dangerous for swimming and are closed because of algal blooms. And we saw the devastating effect of stormwater assets, neglected stormwater assets in the recent February flooding, soon after an Auditor General's report on this very topic of the handover of stormwater assets. Over the past few years, the government is gradually squeezing funding from street sweeping, even though we have more roads and footpaths and more people using them. It's also nearly impossible for Canberrans to get streetlights fixed in a timely manner. Many Canberrans wait 3 months or so to get a single streetlight fix. It mightn't seem to matter, it mightn't seem like a big deal, but for some people it is very much a safety issue. If that light is the one you depend on to walk safely in your street or put your bin out, it does matter. If it's the light that makes a walk home from the bus stop safe, it does matter. And at this time of the year, where it's darker earlier, more and more people are walking home from the bus stop, from the shops, in the dark because of the winter hours. People report them and they take a long time. I get a number of emails about this, and I encourage people to report via Fix My Street. I report things myself via Fix My Street. But people then come to me when the Fix My Street request has not been acted upon for quite some time. We do expect and deserve to have safe and attractive suburban surrounds, especially when rates are at record levels. This week's budget has confirmed the ACT government is collecting the cash, and the general neglect of local services is therefore inexcusable. And what makes it even worse, Madam Speaker, is the government doesn't appear to care about, to want community feedback about these local services. In this week's budget, the government have conveniently removed 5 measures of customer satisfaction and public safety. Unsurprisingly, these measures in the past few years have shown a decline in satisfaction with the government's management of public spaces. So the best way to do away with these poor customer satisfaction levels is to abolish the measures. So we no longer have to deal with not meeting targets. It's a very convenient way of working. And then we have this self-congratulatory motion which seems to ignore the fact that satisfaction was declining over the years and now has been removed from the budget. There's only one real detail in Ms Shane's motion, one figure, and that's the planting of 1,330 trees. And these trees are to reduce the heat island effect in urban areas. Well, that's interesting. I repeat, Madam Speaker, to cool down the city, the government will plant 1,330 trees. Now, it is admirable to plant 1,330 trees, and we support that. Many of us have planted that and many more in projects across the country over the past few years. But the government here is trying to make a virtue out of something that's pretty much business as usual, and it's not much of a contribution to Canberra's urban tree forest. They're saying they're going to plant 1,330 trees when it's actually a fraction of the annual plantings of other years. Let's put 1,330 trees into perspective. It's approximately, in very rough terms, about 13 trees per suburb. We have over 750,000 public trees in Canberra. So this year's 1,330 new trees is around 1.6% of the number of urban public trees. Planting this number will hardly keep up with the current rate at which our suburban and street trees are dying. By comparison, in 2007, this government committed $30.8 million as part of the Million Trees project. By comparison, in 2009, the government planted 6,250 trees in Canberra streets, a further 2,600 around our lakes, and 558 trees were planted that year to replace dying trees. So 1,330 trees is only around double the number the government have cut down for the light rail project. It's only a fraction of the 230,000 trees that the government has planted along the Murrumbidgee corridor since 2008. We support the sensible and carefully selected planting of urban trees, but in this motion, it's trying to make a big deal out of something that's actually pretty much business as usual for the government, nothing out of the ordinary. The second part of that point in Ms Shane's motion is that these 1,330 trees are being planted to reduce the heat island effect in urban areas. And there's a report called The Mapping of Surface Urban Heat in Canberra by CSIRO, commissioned by the ACT government, which has very telling lessons for urban microclimates and the heat island effect in urban areas. One of its findings is that Gungahlin has the highest heat exposure and vulnerability of any Canberra district. So now retrofitting urban trees into Gungahlin to try to reverse the impacts of decades of poor planning policies will only have marginal impacts for that area. Suburbs in Gungahlin are dominated by small blocks, extensive rooftops and narrow road verges with no space for trees. 1,330 trees, even if they could be planted, will have very little effect because of the planning regime in place under which Gungahlin was built. By comparison, in the new development of Ginninderry, the urban heat island effect is being tackled at the planning stage. In stage 1 of this new development, 350 houses will be built and 1,200 street trees planted. We support the adoption of policies to reduce the urban heat island effect, but it must be based on facts. Trees are important, but the planning policy must incorporate that, not thwart or discourage it. So throwaway lines like in the current budget, like plant 1,330 trees to reduce the heat island effect in urban areas, must be seen for what it is. At best, business as usual. At worst, hypocritical, self-gratifying and out of step with policies in other areas. I'll briefly touch on playgrounds of $1 million allocated, which could include new playgrounds. We've had a lot of requests from the public about playgrounds, many of which have been denied by this government. How much will actually be spent on running the consultative process when we're ignoring the input of constituents as it is? We've seen petitions and approaches from many groups in this place for Greenway, for Higgins, for Torrens, for Warramanga. We need to upgrade and improve our existing playgrounds, not only build new playgrounds. We also want to see what the government is actually promising this year. What are we getting? $56 million spent with more ranges. How many more? The answer is not as many as promised. We're seeing upgrades to 3 ovals, more mowing, weeding, removal of graffiti, tree trimming and waterway cleaning. But, Madam Speaker, this is simply catch-up for years of declining budget in this area. It's not even keeping pace with the population growth. When you starve some areas of resources over years, it's easy to make it look like you're suddenly allocating additional resources with a bit of a boost in a year, and that's what we're seeing here. Not a particularly good real increase in resources, merely playing catch-up, barely keeping our head above waters in providing those basic local services that people expect for their rates, for their very high rates and ever-increasing rates that we're seeing from this government.
Question is the motion be